All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be getting into something that, we all experience, and that's negative feedback.
Hmm.
And you sent over some really interesting research, actually a meta-analysis, which just for anyone who doesn't know is basically a study of a bunch of studies looking specifically at how negative feedback impacts intrinsic motivation.
Right.
And for people who don't know that term, intrinsic motivation, that's that internal drive that we have to do things simply because they're enjoyable or interesting to us.
Yeah, it's that internal engine that powers our engagement,
Mm,
not external rewards or punishments.
yeah,
And feedback, especially when it's critical, can really, rev that engine or totally stall it.
yeah,
It's a powerful force.
right. And I think, that most of us probably feel like negative feedback just automatically kills that inner drive, right? Like it's just deflating.
Right, right. It feels bad, so you don't want to do it anymore.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But this meta-analysis that you shared pulled together findings from 78 different studies, which is a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of data to go through.
Yeah.
Right.
Reveals a much more surprising and nuanced picture.
It does. It does. It kind of flips the script a little bit on what we might intuitively think about this.
Yeah. So what's the big headline here from all of this research for you? Like what should really stick with people?
Well, I think the big headline, and this is something that kind of surprised me when I first dove into this literature, is, surprisingly, this meta-analysis shows that negative feedback, when compared to no feedback, like getting no feedback at all, or even neutral feedback, doesn't significantly impact your intrinsic motivation on average.
Seriously. So hearing what you did wrong, like, isn't necessarily more demotivating than hearing nothing at all, or just like, you did okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the overall picture when you make that specific comparison. So negative feedback versus no feedback.
Huh.
However, things shift a little bit, as you might imagine, when you look at negative feedback compared directly to positive feedback.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So there, the result is probably what you'd expect, right? Negative feedback significantly dampened intrinsic motivation when put up against praise,
Okay.
which makes sense, right?
Oh.
Being told, good job, feels a lot better than being told you need to improve.
Yeah. That tracks, right?
Yeah.
Nobody likes to hear that they suck.
Right.
But this kind of raises the question then, like, why is there this difference? Like, what, depending on what we're comparing negative feedback to, like, why would that be the case?
Right. That's a really interesting question. And that's where these different theories about motivation really come into play.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, like self-determination theory um, gives us a really powerful way to understand why negative feedback can sometimes undermine your intrinsic motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And, self-determination theory really highlights our core psychological needs. And some of our core needs are this need to feel competent,
Right.
right? Like we can do things well and in control of what we're doing. Negative feedback can kind of hit those needs pretty hard,
Yeah.
right? If you're told you messed up, it can make you feel really ineffective. Like, oh, I guess I'm just not capable of doing this well.
Yeah, that feeling of I can't do this well, which definitely makes you want to do it less.
Exactly. Exactly. And negative feedback can also feel like someone else is controlling you,
Right.
right? Like they're telling you what you should be doing. And that can erode your sense of autonomy, that feeling of being in charge of your own choices.
Right.
And so when you feel incompetent or like you're being dictated to, your internal drive to do something simply because you enjoy it tends to, fizzle out.
That makes total sense. Like nobody likes, feeling incompetent or like they're, being micromanaged or whatever.
Exactly.
But you mentioned there are other theories that suggest that negative feedback might not always be so bad.
Yeah, that's right. And so goal setting theory and information processing theory offer, I guess you could say, these alternative views. And, these theories emphasize that negative feedback can actually provide really valuable information. Right. So, for instance, from a goal-setting perspective, if you're working towards something, you have a goal in mind, negative feedback highlights the gap between where you are now and where you want to be.
Uh-huh.
And this can create, actually, a sense of dissatisfaction that can actually push you to work harder to close that gap and achieve your goal.
So it kind of acts like a course correction.
Exactly.
The whoops, missed the target, better aim again.
Precisely. Precisely. And so, information processing theory suggests that all feedback, including the negative kind, gives you crucial data for learning, right? It points out your errors so you can correct them.
Right.
And it can make you more aware of what you still need to learn.
Yeah.
And so when you get negative feedback, you have this chance to adjust your approach, fix your mistakes, and ultimately get better at whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so this process of identifying and solving problems can actually contribute to you feeling more competent over time.
So it seems like the key here is whether you interpret the negative feedback as a personal failure or as useful data that helps you get where you want to go.
Yeah, that's a really insightful way to put it. And this meta-analysis digs even deeper, right? It identifies specific elements within the negative feedback itself that significantly change how it affects your intrinsic motivation.
Hmm.
So it's not just about is it negative or is it positive? It's about what is it about that negative feedback that can shift its impact.
Okay. So let's get into those key factors. Like, what are the ingredients of negative feedback that can make it less demotivating or maybe even, dare we hope, helpful?
Yeah, dare we hope. So one of the most powerful ingredients is whether the negative feedback gives you specific guidance on how to improve. So the meta-analysis demonstrated pretty clearly that when negative feedback includes instructional details, it's much less likely to kill your intrinsic motivation.
Uh,
And so this instructional feedback, as it's sometimes called, focuses your attention on what you can do differently in the future.
right.
And that can boost your feelings of competence, like, okay, I know what to do now.
That makes such a huge difference, right? Instead of just hearing like, you're wrong, it's like, you're wrong, and here's a better way to approach it this next time.
That's exactly right. It's
Yeah,
like it's not just focusing on the past. It's like, here's how you can do it better next time.
totally. Yeah.
Another really crucial element is whether the feedback is based on objective criteria versus how you compare to others. Right. And so feedback rooted in objective standards, so think like, 7 out of 10 tasks weren't completed correctly,
Uh-huh.
is less harmful to your intrinsic motivation than feedback that pits you against others.
Yeah.
Like your performance was lower than most of your colleagues.
Right, because it keeps your focus on like, okay, here's the task. This is what I did well. This is what I didn't do well, rather than like, oh, I'm being compared to all these other people and I'm not as good as them.
Exactly. You have more power to improve your own performance against a set standard, right?
Right.
Than you do to control how everyone else performs.
Exactly.
So that's a really big one. Now, this next finding might surprise you.
Okay.
The delivery method of the feedback, so how you get that feedback, matters.
Okay.
And the research indicated that negative feedback delivered in person tended to be less demotivating and even potentially slightly motivating compared to getting no feedback at all in some cases than feedback given through written, visual, or computer-based methods.
Wow. That is not what I would have expected at all. Yeah, I know.
Because it feels like, I don't know, if you're receiving criticism to your face, it just feels more, I don't know, intense or something. Why might that be better?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive for sure. Um, you know, th- there are a few potential reasons why in-person delivery might be better in this regard. One is that in-person delivery might communicate a greater sense of care and investment from the person giving the feedback,
Okay.
right? If they're taking the time to sit down with you face to face, they're like, okay, they are, they're invested in this. It also allows for immediate clarification, right? You
Good
can
point.
have a dialogue.
Yeah.
You can, go back and forth. You can really get a more nuanced understanding of what the message is. And it just could feel more like a collaborative problem-solving session, right?
Yeah.
Rather than just a one-way judgment.
Right. It's like, oh, we're in this together, kind of.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense because I think, a real conversation allows for like tone and empathy that can get easily lost, in an email or like a written report or something like that. So what about some of the other like, motivational aspects within the feedback itself?
Yeah. So the meta-analysis looked at several other interesting features. So for instance, when negative feedback attributed poor performance to lack of effort rather than a lack of inherent ability, that tended to be less damaging to your motivation.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Effort is something that you perceive as being within your control, something you can change.
Right. I didn't try hard enough. Feels
Mm.
like something I can address. I'm just not good at this. Feels much more permanent and discouraging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a really big one, I think. And then also combining criticism with some praise can help cushion the negative blow to your self-esteem. Right. Even if that praise is about, the process you used, or the effort that you put in. And then also feedback delivered in a way that supports your autonomy, using phrases like, you could consider this rather than you must do that
Right.
is much better for maintaining that intrinsic drive that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's there's this idea of what's called wise feedback. And so think of wise feedback as feedback that sets high expectations while also clearly communicating belief in your ability to meet them.
Right.
And that's a really motivating approach.
That sounds like the sweet spot, right? Like you're being challenged, but you're also being made to feel like you are capable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then finally, the intensity of the negative feedback matters.
Oh.
Right. So milder criticism is less damaging than harsh, severe criticism.
Right.
If it's not overly threatening, it's less likely to trigger these really strong, demotivating feelings.
Yeah, so be direct, but not brutal.
Exactly. Exactly.
So now this research also looked at the person receiving the feedback, right?
That's right.
Do things like age or gender play a role in how you react to that feedback?
Yeah, and this is where, the research gets really interesting because we start to see these individual differences pop up.
Mm.
And so, interestingly, this study found some evidence suggesting that negative feedback might be more detrimental to intrinsic motivation for college-age students compared to younger students from, preschool all the way up through high school.
Huh. That's a surprising age-related difference. Any thoughts on why that might be?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's possible that as you get older, you face more high-stakes academic or career situations, right?
Right.
And so negative feedback might carry more weight. It might feel more threatening to your, developing sense of competence and your future prospects.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, like the pressures of higher education and career building, I could see that being, yeah. So what about gender? We often hear that women might be more sensitive to negative feedback.
Right.
Is there any evidence to support that?
Yeah. And that's something that's been explored in a lot of different studies. And while some individual studies have suggested that, this meta-analysis didn't find consistent, significant differences between genders overall in how negative feedback impacts intrinsic motivation.
Okay.
So that general idea that one gender is universally more effective than the other wasn't strongly supported by this really broad look at the research.
Okay. Good to know. And then one last personal factor. How interesting you find the task itself. Does that change how you respond to negative feedback?
Yeah, it does. The negative impact of negative feedback tended to be smaller when you report the task itself as interesting. So if you're already engaged and enjoying what you're doing, the feedback, even if it's critical, might have less power to diminish that inherent enjoyment.
Right.
You're more invested. You see the feedback as part of the learning process within something you already value.
That definitely resonates with my experience. Like if I'm working on something I genuinely enjoy, criticism feels, less like a personal attack and more like a puzzle piece to figure out within something I care about.
Right.
So given all of these insights, for our listeners, what are some practical takeaways here? Like how can you use this information to, better handle negative feedback when you receive it and maybe even deliver it more effectively yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from a receiving standpoint, I think a key takeaway is to actively look for the instructional value in negative feedback.
Okay.
Instead of just dwelling on the negative evaluation, try to pinpoint any specific guidance on how you can improve. That shift in perspective can help you see the feedback as a tool for growth rather than a criticism of your past performance.
So train yourself to ask, okay, they said this wasn't up to par, but what exactly are they suggesting I do differently next time?
Exactly. Also, try to focus on objective criteria if they're provided.
Right.
If the feedback is based on measurable outcomes rather than, vague comparisons, it can be a lot easier to accept and to take action on. And then, remember that in-person feedback, while it might feel a bit daunting in the moment, could actually be delivered with positive intent.
Okay.
Right. Like consider the source, consider your relationship with them. If you trust their expertise and believe that they have your best interests at heart, it can make that feedback a lot easier to process.
That's such a good point. Like the relationship and the perceived intent behind the feedback probably makes a huge difference in how you interpret it.
Absolutely. And then from a giving perspective, I think these findings really highlight the importance of providing specific actionable steps for improvement when you're the one delivering negative feedback to somebody else. Frame it around objective criteria whenever possible.
Right.
Consider having those conversations in person when appropriate. And then really emphasize effort, emphasize the potential for growth and try to deliver that feedback in a way that respects their autonomy and fosters a sense of trust.
So to sum up, I think this deep dive shows that negative feedback isn't this straightforward motivation killer we often think it is, especially when you compare it to getting no feedback at all. And really, the crucial element here is the how. The specific details within the feedback and the way it's delivered make all the difference in whether it fuels your inner drive or diminishes it.
Precisely. The way it's framed,
Mm.
whether it offers a path forward, relies on objective standards, even just how it's communicated, can significantly alter its impact on that internal motivation that's so important to all of us.
This really makes you think, right? Like if negative feedback can be neutral or even potentially helpful under the right circumstances, how can you actively seek it out and use it to your advantage?
Right.
How can you cultivate a mindset where feedback is seen as fuel for your growth rather than something to be feared?
Right.
And what kind of feedback environments, whether at work, in your studies, or your personal life, would best nurture that intrinsic motivation that we've been discussing?
Yeah, those are really critical questions to ponder. I think, for everyone listening, reflect on times you've received negative feedback.
Yeah.
Did your experience align with any of these patterns that we talked about?
Right.
Were there specific elements that made it feel more or less helpful to your internal drive
Yeah.
to learn and to improve?
This has been a truly eliminating deep dive. It's clear that navigating negative feedback is far more complex than just good or bad. And by grasping these nuances, you can learn to engage with feedback more effectively, protect, and even potentially enhance that precious intrinsic motivation that fuels real learning and lasting satisfaction.
Oh.
So thanks for unpacking all of this with us.
Oh, of course. It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening to the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.